Hi, I'm Neil from the RuneQuest project, and welcome to Tales from the Black Alynx, a podcast series where we talk to the authors of the Jonstown Compendium publications. For our first episode, we're talking to the writer responsible for the best-selling campaign 6 Seasons in Sarta. Hi, who are you and where are you?
Hi, my name's Andrew Montgomery. I'm an American, but I've been living in Japan for the last 20 years. Currently, I'm right in Tokyo.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining us for the inaugural episode. We've got some questions that we've fired over to you, so hopefully you have a bit of a good chat. So, what's your history with RPGs, and how did you first encounter RuneQuest / HeroQuest?
Yeah, so I started playing RPGs when I was very young. I was about 10 years old, still in elementary school, primary school. And it was actually at school. I had a teacher who had got the old Holmes Dungeons and Dragons box set. And of course, Holmes was as you know, a child psychologist. And he thought that role-playing games were good for building up imagination and math skills or whatever. So this teacher actually introduced some of us to it in school. So for about 2 years, I was playing a little bit of D&D. And then I went to secondary school. There was actually a D&D club there, after-school club. So I joined, and it was all older boys than I, but they weren't playing Dungeons and Dragons. They were playing this game called RuneQuest. So I was about 13 at the time. Had to be 1983. That was my first introduction to RQ. Was then it was RQ2 actually. RuneQuest 3 had just come out, but for some reason the boys didn't like it, so we were still playing RQ. So that was my early history with it. Yeah.
And what was the teacher? What was the teacher's subject?
Well, this was primary school, so it was my homeroom teacher.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yeah. So, but I think she had a background in psychology, and I think that's how she got wind of this. She had read an article recommending role playing, but of course, it was just a matter of a couple of years later when the whole Dungeons and Dragons satanic panic started in the States, and so the club actually ended up getting shut down. But
wow.
Yeah.
It's weirdly enough. So we didn't really have much of the panic in the UK. So I come from a similar background. Again, it was an after-school secondary school club with role playing and a bit of board games as well. So Talisman and Greg Stafford's game as well. And it's same kind of deal. That I think you move on to harder stuff in terms of RuneQuest. A bit more gritty and a bit more natural. It just really gelled with me. So
for me, it was just love at first sight. I mean, I can't even really explain what it was. I mean, I remember I created a character and I was fighting a brew on a bridge, and it just for some reason, I think you just said it felt more natural, but also it just felt I don't know, more like the mythology that I had read when I was a kid, because I had been really in Greek mythology and all of this. And so it felt less like Tolkien to me and more like, Robert Graves or Edith Hamilton or something like that. So I really, yeah.
Yeah, it also seemed to, the kids that would play and still play D&D seemed to be very much, I'm all powerful, I do this and it's amazing. Whereas RuneQuest seemed to be a bit more, I try and do this and XYZ happens, and it's the randomness but exactness of what happens in RuneQuest I kind of really hooked into.
Exactly. And it was, we were playing RuneQuest as our main game, but they were also into the other new Chaosium games at the time, Stormbringer and Call of Cthulhu. And Cthulhu, of course, was that perfect example of the sort of anti-D&D, where it's not about being all powerful, it's about how spectacularly you were destroyed, or going insane. So yeah, it was a very different kind of game experience, I think.
And can you remember what that first character was?
My first character in RuneQuest. Actually, it was a brown elf.
Oh, wow.
So my first character was an elf, yeah. I was just, struck by the idea of playing a plant. So
It's
yeah,
a funny one, isn't it? Yeah, mine was actually a baboon, funnily enough. But my compatriot was an elf in that around Apple Lane. It was excellent.
yes, yeah, no, I mean it definitely stands out in my mind. And I later played Snake Pipe Hollow,
Uh-huh.
and I again with my elf, I had a sling. It was very David and Goliath. I just lucked out and got a critical to the giant's head, so it was completely David and Goliath. And
Oh wow.
I love that aspect of RuneQuest as well. That it did feel kind of quirky, and you were never really sure what was going to happen. It was so unpredictable. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned Snakepipe Hollow. I mean, that leads us on to the next question. So, do you have a favorite RuneQuest official publication?
Official publication. See, that's a hard one because how do you not say Cults of Prax? How do you not say Cults of Terror? How do you not say Troll Pack? But there are just so many amazing ones. But I think in that era, to be like the Big Rubble or Prax. I mean, because that was just such a sandbox setting. Think a little later, I was quite enamored with some of the RQ3 stuff when they started coming out with it. I really loved Michael O'Brien's Sun County. Was really a great book also. So
All of them.
don't ask me to pick just one. So.
Okay, and then in terms of primary games, so you mentioned RQ2. Did you end up going through RQ3 and then up through the series until RQG?
Played RQ3 long enough to know that it wasn't my cup of tea. So I actually went back to RQ2, and I was running RQ2 up until the late 90s, really. And then I made the jump from RQ2 to Hero Wars when it first came out. Ran a campaign in that. In fact, I ran 6 seasons in Sarder in that. I had also run it 6 seasons in Sarder previously in RQ2. So I converted that over and played it. That, of course, I tried Hero Quest when it became Hero Quest, the first edition. Then I kind of was away from Glorantha for a couple of years. Finally came back when Hero Quest Glorantha came out, so the newest one. And went back, revived 6 seasons in Sarder, and was blogging about it. And it was around that time that RQG came out, and so I jumped into that. So I did miss the Mithras RQ6 stream of it. I stuck mostly with the Chaosium ones and with the Hero Wars, Hero Quest.
Yep, gotcha. And how are you finding RQG itself? I mean, do you?
I love it. But I mean, it is essentially RuneQuest 2, which is what I like about it. But Jeff and the team have ported in fantastic elements from like King Arthur Pendragon with the passions and the way that they use runes in this game. There are elements of Hero Quest brought in with augments and stuff like that. And I just love that they've gone back to tying the game into Glorantha. Because, to be honest, that is what irked me with RQ3, actually. I was in love with Glorantha, and then the new, RQ3 came out in Fantasy Europe. I'm like, what are these pennies? That sort of thing. Where were my lunars? So...
you didn't want to play Pict.
I was not interested in Cormac the Pict. No, it just didn't float my boat the same way. I really loved Glorantha, and ironically, it happened to me again because I was playing Hero Wars and then Hero Quest, and then, as you know, they released a generic version of Hero Quest, the second edition, and I was just, here it was happening again, So finally, when RuneQuest came back and they were like committed to RuneQuest role-playing in Glorantha, I was really, really in love with that. So
I mean, the setting definitely does make it personally. They've got so much a wealth of information that they can draw upon, and the work that they're doing now, especially where we've just seen a portion of the map that Jeff Richards published today, and it's very exciting.
I chat quite a bit with Jeff. We've become pretty good friends, actually, and just stuff that they're working on. It just looks spectacular. So yeah.
Fantastic. So I suppose that leads us on to, mentioned 6 seasons in Starter, that you've played it for a few years, and you mentioned in the publication that it's pushing 10 years that you've been writing it. Was there anything specific that made you take the leap into writing for the JC?
I mean, it was a sort of a combination of things. I was not initially thinking about it, but when the Jonstown Compendium opened, Michael O'Brien mentioned it to me and asked if I was interested in doing anything for it. And I was sort of busy at the time. I didn't really have time to commit to that kind of project. But the idea was growing in my head. And I had been messaging back and forth with Nick Brooke, of course, who wrote A Rough Guide to Glamour. And he was sort of keeping me updated on how that project was coming. And it sort of, conversations with him just sort of put it in my head, well, maybe I should give this a try. And of course, in real life, I'm a university professor, and we were shut down because of COVID in the beginning, back in March and April. So I was sitting around the house anyway. So I just figured that was the perfect time to commit and write the book. And the rest is history. So I guess, in a way, I suppose I have to thank the pandemic in a strange way.
Maybe you can give us a bit of a synopsis, just a summary of the campaign itself.
6 Seasons in Sarder is set really just before the Hero Wars in 1619. And it takes place in a sort of mountain valley near Boldholm. The clan there is a very, very small clan. They're very traditionalist, again, sort of throwback to earlier Orlanthe society. But the twist is that this campaign doesn't promote itself as a, how do I say, real Glorantha. Instead, the idea is that this campaign is based on an epic poem by a poet who lived in the late Third Age. So this idea of having this sort of traditional, idyllic Orlanthe clan, is it a real clan, or is it just this author's sort of Norman Rockwell idealism or whatever picture of Orlanthe life, right? And that gave me the freedom to do a lot of things by having it based on this fictional poem. So in the story, which takes place over 6 seasons, not surprisingly, set in Sarder, and starts with a group of young people who are coming of age, and they go through the adulthood initiation rites, male and female. And then it sort of follows them over their first year of adulthood. But they are the first generation of grown-up lunar rule. So they're in a sort of different world than their parents were in. And of course, of the campaign, bad things are going to happen. And I probably shouldn't give away much more than that. But
is there are specific characters that the players play, or do you roll up your own characters and insert them into the campaign?
They roll up their own characters. There's this idea that there was this mythical poem, and it had fixed characters. But I wanted the players to create their own characters. The NPCs, however, are all there in the village. So,
Sure.
They're the constant. But I really wanted, I really feel strongly that I'm not a fan of pre-generated characters. Just because I feel like the player character is the player's artistic contribution to the art form. And I kind of like it when they bring what they want to the table, and I try to accommodate them. So, yeah.
For sure. And it's, it's a fun part of the whole process of role-playing, I think, is that initial session 0, where you can really take on that character.
I agree completely.
I was going to say, so obviously you mentioned in the pandemic that you started writing. Did you have a specific process? Did you plan things out, or did you have it pretty much worked out already?
Well, I was being a little bit disingenuous there, because I have written before, but nothing for gaming. I wrote 2 plays when I was younger, and a couple of novels, actually. So I do have a sort of background in writing, and I just sort of engaged the process there, which is basically, I have a skeleton of the story in my head, but I don't like to plot too much. I would rather let the story take me where it takes me.
Mm-hmm.
That made this a little bit of a new experience for me, because in a campaign, you're not necessarily writing a story. You are writing for someone else to create their story with.
Yeah.
So the goal became to create a sort of toy chest with lots of things for game masters to play with. So what I would do is write a story, but you want to leave lots of variables in it. And, I put in all of these box text sort of notes to the GM on, well, I don't like this, change it, or take this and do this, or whatever. And the process became one really of stepping back a little bit and trusting that the GM who runs this will fill in the gaps in his or her own way. So.
Mm-hmm. So the writing obviously was fairly natural to you. Were there any elements of the publication process that you did struggle with?
Yes. So I got through the PDF pretty easily. And as anybody who was following me on Facebook at that time, or in the RuneQuest group or Glorantha group, will tell you, because I was very loud about this. In it, the PDF came out, you started having people ask about, when is the print coming, right? Sort of like, you've released this book, and then immediately somebody is going to say, when's the print copy? Because people mistake the Jonstown Compendium for Chaosium. With Chaosium, you know that if they release the Pegasus Plateau, there will be a hardcover coming. But this was still early days in the Jonstown Compendium, and there were no hard, fast rules on how that was going to happen. So explored that option again with Michael O'Brien, and he put me in touch with who I needed to talk to at Drive-Thru, and it got okayed. I have absolutely no experience with layout, with producing a document for full color print. No skill whatsoever. And so I contacted a friend in the States who does this professionally. His name is John Lemaire. He started to help me out with it. But there's no way that I could have done it without him. And it was a nightmare. We done everything wrong in producing the PDF. The indentations were the wrong size for the print book conversion. Colors were all off. I had put in shadows. All the shadows needed to be removed. So it actually took longer to produce this for print than it did to actually write the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
And this is before the Electrum setting, or had you reached that level of sales?
I had reached it, but it was not a prerequisite like it is now.
Yeah.
I had already reached it, but yeah, it wasn't. That wasn't the rule yet.
Sure. And it said, you mentioned earlier that you had formed a friendship with Jeff, and that Michael O'Brien had helped you with the process for the putting together the print. Was there any other input from Chaosium staff? And it sounds like it was a really good process of collaboration with.
Well, actually, no. I didn't share anything with Jeff or Michael or anybody, really. Again, a lot of it was already out there on the blog. And I know that they had read some of that, so they had a sense of what I was doing. I had a conversation with Michael early on, and he had made it very clear that the JC, the Jonstown Compendium, is not Chaosium, and they want the authors to sort of go their own way and do their own things. So I didn't really feel the need to check with Chaosium. By using the conceit that I did of this being based on a poem, I felt that I could really do whatever I wanted. For example, clan is the 13th clan of the Kalamar tribe. And as we all know, there are only 12 clans in the Kalamar tribe. There aren't 13.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do that. You don't really need to check with Chaosium if you have that kind of, what can I say, that framework going, where I could just sort of invent things and say, oh, well, I'm not saying it. This author is saying it. That kind of thing.
Yes. It's a very clever premise. I do like the 13th clan idea. It gives you a way to to explain away their history, essentially. So that was a really cool part of the campaign.
A theme crept into the book early on, which I didn't really expect was coming, but again, the way that I write, I sometimes don't know what's going to emerge. But it was, the book also expresses sort of my feelings on the concept of canon in general. And that coming from an academic background, used to this idea of people reading ancient scriptures, and then arguing about accuracy and is this translation more accurate than that one, and do we know, did these events actually happen, or are they fictional, or whatever. And I started to look at the project that way, as a sort of canon busting framework. Basically saying everything really is canon. Whatever is in your campaign is canon, and sort of allowed me to sort of to do that, to execute that.
It works really well. I think reading through the campaign, it works really, really well. So obviously you're happy with the final product. Are there things that you would tweak, or is this your top shelf work?
Hopefully not. I'm hoping the sequel will be top shelf. But learning process. And I was only expecting to put out a PDF. Now I know better, and hopefully it'll go more smoothly if we do get to print on the next one. But I don't know things. I suppose that I would. Let me rephrase that. I wouldn't change anything about 6 Seasons, but I am changing a lot of stuff in the way that I execute the sequel, I guess. So all of the changes that I might have made to 6 Seasons, I'm actually making or implementing in the sequel instead. So yeah,
it's obviously a gold bestseller, one of only 2 on the Jonstown Compendium at the moment. That was something, of course, you expected to happen, or was it a bit of a surprise?
Again, when I put out 6 Seasons in Sartor, it was pretty early days, and no idea what to expect. The armies and enemies of Dragon Pass, it was still at just silver. So I was expecting, I think it's Electrum now, but then when Nick came along with a Rough Guide to Glamour, and it sailed all the way to gold, then I started to wonder, if it was a possibility. But again, it was so early on, none of us really knew how these were going to sell. And no, I never expected to sell that many copies. I didn't think that there would be that much interest. So
yeah, it's very interesting looking at on the drive-through RPG as a whole, and it seems that the Jonstown Compendium is doing really well, especially within the community section. It's absolutely smashing it.
I've gone through and I've looked at not just other community content titles, but even other publications from Chaosium and other companies. And yeah, sure, you have the occasional PDF that comes along and is platinum or adamantine or whatever. Look around. It's unusual even for books to make it to gold on drive-through RPG. So I think that Compendium is doing a fantastic job, and everybody's titles are just keep getting more and more impressive. So it's me nervous about the sequel because I have to keep upping the game.
You have to improve yourself each time, and the response from general RuneQuest fans has been positive, I assume.
That was, I think, the most, I don't know, moving thing, I guess. When I, the reviews that I had, the website, and then some other people had reviewed it. It still gets me to this day. I'm almost choked up. Yeah, so
fantastic. Awesome. So if you had unlimited time and budget, is there a project that you'd like to undertake?
There's a lot of projects. I don't have unlimited time or budget, but I'm sort of pouring everything into the sequel right now.
Or unlimited patience.
Yes, well, that too. I would also like to do something for Call of Cthulhu, for the Miskatonic repository, which is the Call of Cthulhu counterpart to the Jonstown Compendium. So that's a project that I would like to do. I've got a couple actually, sort of outlined or ideas for them, but dream job, nothing specific. I'd love to bring back Chaosium's Nephilim RPG, which I'm a huge fan of, but that would be a dream project, I suppose.
So the next question is where we make friends and potentially enemies. Is there a favorite Jonstown compendium project that you weren't involved with that you would have liked to have been?
God, I mean, there have been so many of them. Not ones that I would have been involved with. I am much more pleased with just sitting back and reading what everybody is doing. You know, having it come at me as a reader. That A Rough Guide to Glamour was brilliant piece of work, and I think that was sort of the benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the Jonstown Compendium, because once Nick and his team had done that, made almost everything possible. It showed us what print might look like. It showed us
Yeah.
what having actual artists might look like. And Martin's Armies and Enemies of Dragon Pass. Amazing, and also the sequel to that, the Men of the West. These are brilliant projects. And a little book that somebody wrote called Legion, which I rather liked, but I don't know who that author was. No,
some chancer.
Somebody somebody came up with it,
Yeah.
which again, just the idea of that, of just I'm just going to do a book of brew. I mean, that is an idea that I wish I had come up with. And it's sort of like a lot of stuff that I'm seeing in the compendium that just blows my mind. It just shows how passionate and talented I think the RuneQuest, the Glorantha community is. Yeah.
Agreed. I think it's working out really well to be drinks between the main events of the official publications coming out, just to have it's almost like having conversations with fans remotely. You're reading their conversations, you're reading their passion in the books. It's great.
Yeah.
It's a great idea. I'm glad, really glad that it's working out.
I don't think that we're ever going to compete with Chaosium, and I don't think that that's the intention. But
No.
I think we are reaching a stage now where you look at the compendium releases, and it's getting harder and harder to tell which is Chaosium and which one is a Jonstown compendium. The game is really being upped, and I feel that people for the compendium are doing the things that maybe Chaosium can't do necessarily. Like slightly alternative takes on Glorantha, right? Because Chaosium has to be giving us the sort of baseline, right? And what Jonstown Compendium authors seem to be doing is, well, we're going to do a little bit of a twist here. We're going to take things away from the baseline. Nick, for example, we're going to have a lunar emperor who looks like Elvis, that kind of thing. I mean, you can. It just feels like don't necessarily have to stick to the script as much with the JC. So
it certainly really is a community effort, and you're getting a lot of people's different flavor and takes on Glorantha. It's working really well, and some things are not going to be to particular people's tastes, and vice versa. But I think it's really spreading the net wide.
Yeah, I would agree completely. Yeah.
So you mentioned what's next. What is it that you've got in the pipeline, and what are you able to feed us by way of teasers?
Hopefully by Christmas. It's going at a pretty good pace here, and actually for the next term at my university, I told the dean that I was cutting back from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, so that I would have 2 days to write.
Fantastic.
The book that's coming is called The Company of the Dragon, and the idea here is that Six Seasons in Sarder, as I mentioned, is supposedly based on a Third Age poem by a man named Yusufis of Jonstown. And scholars have generally assumed that Six Seasons in Sarder is a work of fiction that he created, totally from his imagination. Well, it turns out that there was another writer in the Third Age. His name is Temerin the Younger, and he was a lunarized Sardarite, a historian, wrote a book on the war bands operating in the mountains of Sardar just before the Hero Wars. And what I mean by that are those who have sort of taken to the hills and are refusing to accept lunar rule. And they're sort of hiding out in the mountains and doing things like raiding caravans and all this. So anyway, the idea here is that he wrote a history of these. And one of the chapters in his book is called The Company of the Dragon. And there are some resembling factors between the Company of the Dragon and Yusufis's characters in Six Seasons in Sarder. So that scholars, quote unquote scholars, my imaginary scholars, are questioning whether or not there might have been more truth in Six Seasons in Sarder than people had believed. All of this is just sort of me setting up the conceit of, if you want to run the Company of the Dragon as a sequel to Six Seasons in Sarder, it is. But it's also a standalone campaign. Whether or not there's a relationship to Six Seasons in Sarder is your decision to make.
And that was set around the Dragon Rise, did you say?
It picks up in 1620, right after Six Seasons in Sarder, except this time it covers a 5-year period and goes up to the Dragon Rise. And follows a particular warband called the Company of the Dragon, who will be your player characters, who are clanless and tribeless. And they're hiding in the mountains. They're working with other rebels and indirectly working with Kalir, just in sort of a rebellion against the Lunars. But the main connection that they have to the characters in Six Seasons in Sarder is the Company of the Dragon is united by this this sort of clan, or the sort of a warband spirit, a draconic spirit. And that's similar to something that happens in Six Seasons in Sarder. And this sort of ties them to Kalir's designs to wake up the Brown Dragon. So it's a 5-year saga this time, but it's completely different in that it will be based on episodes. Instead of having, like, Six Seasons in Sarder has 6 scenarios and then some episodes on the end, which are sort of short filler stories. This time, it's going to be about 50 to 60 episodes, and you will assemble your own campaign. No 2 campaigns will be alike. It's not like you're going to run through this story, and this story. It's more like, here are 50 to 60 different stories. Run through as many of them as you like. Some are keyed to certain years. So, for example, some of the episodes have to take place during the Great Winter, when people are suffering and starving in Sarder. Some have to take place a little bit earlier, but a lot of them you can play at any time. And there are only a couple of them that are crucial to the campaign. For example, one where you will go into a sealed Dragon Newt city under Kalir Starbrow's orders or asking to recover the last piece of the dragon's soul that she needs to reawaken the Brown Dragon. So anyway, have your 5-year campaign, and everybody's campaign will be a little bit different from everyone else's, but it sort of all comes together in this final episode, which leads into the Dragon Rise.
Fantastic. Now, that sounds really very, very cool. And you've committed yourself now to before Christmas. You heard it here first.
I did that intentionally. I went into the Facebook RuneQuest and Glorantha groups and posted the ad, because it sort of puts a gun to my head and sort of says, all right, get to the keyboard and write, So It's how I motivate myself sometimes, going back to process. I find that if I put something out there, people are expecting it. It motivates me more than if I just sit back and eat donuts and watch TV all day. So yeah.
That's it. Yeah, have the community hold you accountable. That's
and you know they will. They will. So.
Fantastic. Okay, so the final question is, which runes or deity do you commit yourself to today? Or who do you most relate to?
I think that this is going to have Six Seasons in Sarder fans screaming and carrying torches and searching for my apartment in Tokyo. But I am at heart a Lunar. And
seems to be very common in the community, funnily enough.
Yeah, in fact, all through high school, my long-term RuneQuest character was Seven Mothers Priestess. Later, I just sort of turned around to telling stories from the Sarder point of view. So I'm going to go with the Seven Mothers. I'm going to go with life, moon, and death, I think. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Andrew, thanks very much for talking to me, and you're very welcome on the inaugural episode. So we'll look forward to what was the name of the second book again? Sorry, Company of the Dragon.
Company of the Dragon. Yeah.
Fantastic, excellent. Well, thanks again for being with us.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Tales from the Black Alynx. If you enjoyed the podcast, we'd love it if you were able to leave a review or rating on iTunes or your podcast software of choice. Or if you really liked it, you can support us via Patreon. You can contact us with questions and interview requests via our Facebook page, facebook.com/groups/The RuneQuest Project, or email us at therunequestproject@gmail.com.